So if Aristotle was wrong about everything that he said, why on earth do we even care or want to talk about anything that he said at all? Why is it that we begin with Aristotle when we start talking about how the earth works and Western ideas of what the earth is made up of? Well, that's because he was influential for over 2,000 years, and many of his ideas actually formed the foundation for 2,000 years of the history of science and natural philosophy. This image here is of Aristotle on the right and his teacher Plato on the left. Plato is telling him that everything we need to know about the universe is found in the forms, in the heavens, in what is perfect. And Aristotle says, no, we need to look here on Earth and study what the Earth is made up of. So that's what we're going to talk about really quickly today. So how does Aristotle's ideal Earth work? First of all, Aristotle's Earth is the planet that we live on. It is the center of the universe. It is ideal. It is perfectly spherical. But how does it work? What is it made up of? First, we have to start with the basics. It's made up of 4 distinct elements. Each of these elements is ideal, and everything on our Earth is made up of a combination of these things. So we have, starting at 3 o'clock, we have the ideal element of earth. Then going around clockwise, we have the ideal element of water, air, and fire. Each one of these elements has 2 qualities that are associated with it. Earth is dry and cold, water is cold and wet, air is wet and hot, fire is hot and dry. If you'll notice, the qualities are on opposite sides of the diagram from each other. Hot is opposite from cold, dry is opposite from wet. This keeps some elements from being hot and cold at the same time because they cannot be both hot and cold. All elements on Earth have a combination of 2 of these qualities. But again, they have to be dry and cold or dry and hot, not hot and cold. Also, each of these elements has heaviness or lightness. Starting with the earth is the heaviest element of all, and then if we move clockwise around the diagram, fire would be the lightest. So then water and air would be between fire and earth. According to Aristotle, if everything on earth were perfect and unchanging, this is how our diagram of earth would look. Earth would be in the very center, then water would be around it, then air, then fire, then the moon, then the celestial region, where all the planets and the stars are, which is made up of a 5th element called quintessence. And we're not really going to talk about that when talking about earth sciences. But, again, all of this for Aristotle is ideal. This is how it would work if everything on Earth were unchanging. However, everything on Earth is not unchanging. Earth is imperfect. Earth is always changing. There are 2 types of motion on Earth: toward the center and away from the center. Everything on Earth tends towards the center, which is what causes us to remain on Earth, here in the center of the universe. As everything does change on Earth, Aristotle blamed these changes on what we call the 4 causes. One of the videos explained these very quickly in the form of a watch. I'm going to do it again in the form of a statue. This statue is called the Winged Victory of Samothrace. If we look at a sculpture as having the 4 causes, we would say the formal cause of this statue is a statue, a winged goddess. The material cause would be stone. It is made out of stone, the material that the sculpture is made out of. The efficient cause, that which actually causes the change, would be the sculptor. And the final cause would be the main reason that this whole sculpture was carved, and that was to commemorate a naval battle in Hellenistic Greece. All things on Earth are affected by these causes, not just things that humans make. A tree growing is affected by these 4 causes. An oak tree, you could explain talking about these 4 causes. For Aristotle, everything on Earth was imperfect and always changing. However, creation does have 2 goals. Creation tends towards order and towards perfection. For Aristotle, order and perfection were male. Nature tends towards the perfection of the male side of nature. And we will be talking about that more when we talk about biology. Aristotle was not the only guy with ideas out there. There were other people out there. There were other groups that had ideas on how the earth worked. The Stoics were one of them. The Epicureans were another. The Epicureans were a group who tended to have completely opposite ideas from Aristotle. They based themselves on the philosophy of Epicurus, who was a 2nd to 3rd century BC philosopher. And he believed, basically, that the universe is eternal, the earth was eternal, and he agreed with Aristotle there. But that's where the Epicureans stop agreeing with Aristotle. Basically, everything else in their philosophy is the opposite of what Aristotle said. Like Aristotle, they tried to create a complete, complex, integral system of natural philosophy involving these particular tenets. Epicurus responded to Aristotle's ideas. For example, Aristotle said that our universe, the earth, the moon, the stars, the other planets, was just the only universe that was out there. Aristotle believed that there were no voids or vacuums, that our universe is the only one. Epicurus said no, our universe is one of many. Where our universe ends, there must be other ones. Also, Aristotle believed in order and perfection. Epicurus believed that everything happened by chance and not because of order or some unmoved mover, some unmoved, uncontrollable force out in the universe. Epicurus also believed that everything was formed by atoms and not necessarily elements. These atoms, he believed, moved around and bounced into one another to form compounds based on chaos and chance. He also, again, believed that there were voids and vacuums and areas of just emptiness that Aristotle said was not at all possible. What we have to remember is that when we talk about Epicurean atoms and compounds and elements, we are not talking about atoms the way that we think about them today in the 21st century. So to say that the Epicureans were right about atoms is not accurate at all. They're not the same types of atoms that we believe our elements are made up of today. So we have to remember that kind of stuff when we're talking about these ancient philosophies. To talk about them being right or wrong in a 21st century sense is really, really difficult to do, and we shouldn't try to do that. So if we have Aristotle's ideas, and it forms this complex and complete picture of the earth, and we have Epicurus and his ideas and his group's ideas about the universe, why do we talk more about Aristotle, especially in the history of science, than we do about the Epicurean? Well, part of that has to do with the burden of proof. Who can prove their case the best? The Aristotelians, while they had a theory of everything, if there were inconsistencies in this particular theory, questions of how do the planets move? How do we mix elements together? How do we change elements? How do humans change anything on Earth? If there are inconsistencies or questions that Aristotle or the Aristotelians can't ask, they tend to use logical devices in order to explain away these inconsistencies. And it has to do with what you saw in the second video of talking about syllogism and how to make logical cases for your ideas, essentially. For Epicureans, they had a theory of everything, but if there were inconsistencies, they didn't really know how to answer those questions. They said, we don't really know. Everything is chaos. We'll see what happens. So the Aristotelians could answer these questions. The Epicureans usually could not, which led to the Aristotelian system being extremely empirical. You could observe earth, air, fire, and water. You could observe things changing on Earth. Everybody could observe the same things. You had this observable empirical evidence. For Epicureans, for example, the question was, where are these atoms? How do you know that they're out there bouncing around if I can't see them? They couldn't explain that. They just said, we don't know. That's just kind of what we think is going on. So, for the Aristotelians, they tended to offer natural philosophers balance, stability, confidence in their ideas and their conclusions, as well as virtue. Living a virtuous life, living a virtuous career based on natural philosophy and talking about the earth based on empirical evidence was extremely important. For the Epicureans, they posed far too many questions, and there was too much chance for this particular system to be comfortable. They also believed that virtue and ethics were by chance. If something made you happy, you should do it. You should pursue that. Your ethics, if they work for you, work for you. If they hurt other people, that's their problem. For the Aristotelians, because nature tended toward order and perfection, that's what people on earth should tend toward as well. So the Aristotelians offer confidence in conclusions and virtue, and the Epicureans posed far too many questions for anybody to be confident in what they were talking about. Much, much later on, the Aristotelian system offered religious groups, for example Muslims and Christians, a way to fit God into the theory of the cosmos and the earth. Because earth tended towards order and perfection, it tended towards a divine deity that had created the universe at some time in the eternal past. For the Epicureans, there was no higher power. There was far too much chaos for there to be a higher power. And for that reason, in the ancient Arabic, Islamic, and in the Renaissance, moving into Christian Europe, the Aristotelian system offered a much sturdier foundation on which to base natural philosophy and what is going on earth, as opposed to what the Epicureans were doing. So when we talk about models that will be passed down to us through history and through natural philosophy, the Aristotelian system just makes much more sense to natural philosophers through time. They can work with it, they can ask questions and answer questions based on the Aristotelian system much more than they can on the Epicurean system. So Aristotle. If later on we're not talking about Aristotelian cosmos, if we're not talking about the Aristotelian earth, we don't still necessarily talk about mixing earth and water together to get a new element. Why are we beginning with Aristotle? Why do we talk about Aristotle as the beginning of Western natural philosophy? Well, because it's his ideas that tend to be passed down in certain forms from his time period through the Islamic Empire, through the medieval period in Europe, and even through to the end of the scientific revolution in the 1750s. Why was he so influential? Because there are a couple of reasons. One being that his system just makes sense. It is empirical, it is observable. We can experiment, we can ask questions of his system and get answers that are observable and foundational. Not to mention the fact that he was the teacher of Alexander the Great. When Alexander the Great spread throughout the Hellenistic world, essentially, the ideas that spread with him were Aristotelian ideas. These were the ideas that got spread over the great Alexandrian earth, which was the Mediterranean, into Turkey, into what we now know of as Italy and North Africa. These are the reasons that Aristotle was so influential and why it's so difficult for us to say, in the end he was incorrect, because he did influence almost 2,000 years of natural philosophy, and we're going to continue to talk about him through the rest of the class.